Hi everyone, hope you're all doing well and welcome back to the channel. This is a video I've wanted to share for a while now on a musical pattern which I really enjoy practicing. This is actually from a big written study I put together a while ago, and it's essentially based on an exercise that shows a fun and musical approach for developing your visualization for drop voicings. So a few years ago I started playing around with using drop voicing chord shapes in the form of single note lines by arpeggiating them. It straight away sounded really musical, as it breaks you out of playing in a scalic fashion because the lines were based on chord forms. And so it basically encourages larger intervallic leaps within your phrasing. It then also occurred to me that this was going to just be a really great way to learn these drop voicing shapes on the guitar. So because of this, I set out to create a pattern that used both a drop 2 and a drop 3 voicing within it. I wanted it to be a worthwhile thing to practice, so as well as it training the visualization for those drop voicings, it also had to be a satisfying thing to play and sound pleasing enough for us to want it to come out within our improvisations. This is what we're going to get into today. So quickly, just before we continue, for anyone who's new, my name's Robbie, and this channel is where I like to break down and pass on musical concepts that I enjoy developing to hopefully help you get to the next level of your musicianship. If that sounds like something you're into, make sure to subscribe to see more, and if you enjoy this video, I'd appreciate it if you could hit the like button below. The first idea I created for this was in the key of D major, and it uses the two drop voicings but in second inversion. So let's focus on that pattern first and break it down. Here it is. Okay, so before I break down the pattern, I wanted to quickly touch upon what a drop voicing is. I'm not going to go too in depth, as I will be doing a separate deep dive video on the drop voicing concept. So I'm going to assume you know what a drop voicing is for the purpose of this video, as well as the concept of inversions. But just to quickly explain, drop voicings are a chordal system that allow us to restructure the note order of a 4-note 7th chord originally voiced as a closed voicing. Closed voicing meaning that every interval in a chord is as close together as they can be. So the root would be next to the third would be next to the fifth next to the seventh, and then the seventh would be next to the root but in the new octave. Even when taking a closed voice chord through its different inversions, that order of which notes are next to each other never actually changes. This is where the drop system comes in. So the name drop 2 or drop 3 comes from the process of generating the voicing. A drop 2 is when we move the second note from the top of a closed voice 7th chord down an octave regardless of the inversion we start with. A drop 3 is when we move the third note from the top down instead. This is often the common way we're first taught this arranging technique. However, I do have other preferred ways to generate and visualize drop voicings that are much more guitar friendly. I won't get into that now, but that will definitely be something I share in a later video. So there are several benefits to using drop voicings. Firstly, on the guitar, everyone already uses them, even if they don't realize or haven't expanded on it. This is just because they are much easier to play compared to certain closed voice chords which sound more pianistic. They also give us the possibility to create bigger or more open sounding chords due to the notes being in a different order, as that can introduce larger intervals between some of the notes. And just like any chordal system, knowing the inversions allows us to select which note we want in the melody or which note we want in the bass. Anyway, that's as much as I'll go in for now. Let's get back into the patterns and I'll point out the drop voicing shapes as we go. So this pattern contains a drop 2 and a drop 3 voicing, but I've also included the closed voiced arpeggio in there as well. And all of these voicing types played as single notes share the same chosen inversion, which in this case is a second inversion. So here's a D major 7 voiced as a drop 2 in second inversion. And here's the same inversion, but voiced as a drop 3. So as you can hear, they both give a very different color to the same chord. The drop 3 has much more of an open sound with a higher range, or more distance between the bass and melody note. It also has that cluster happening between the root and the 7th, whereas the drop 2 has more emphasis on the lower range of the voicing. It still has an open sound compared to a closed voicing, however, just not as much as the drop 3, which is a little bit more spread out. Okay, so breaking down the pattern, it starts with the drop 2. We then introduce the drop 3. And then when we start to descend, this is where we include the closed voiced arpeggio. Now, this is still in second inversion, but the only thing we're doing is repeating the bottom note A, which is the 5th, up an octave when we first start to descend. So is the A up an octave, and then we play the closed voiced D major 7 in second inversion. Now, this is already starting to sound like a pretty cool line by itself. But to help connect each voicing and to create a more complete sounding phrase that fills the bar and makes the pattern flow, we're going to add in filler notes. These filler notes can be any note coming from the scale of, in this case, D major. On the PDF for this, I've color coded the filler notes in green, as well as written out a few variations for each pattern. But I do think it's fun for the exercise to try and complete the full scale of whatever chosen mode to get every note in there. As we've already got the root 3rd, 5th and 7th, all we need to add to include each scale degree is the 2nd, 4th and 6th. Let's use the 2nd to help connect into the drop 3 after arpeggiating the drop 2 voicing. For the drop 3 going into the closed voiced arpeggio, this already flows quite well because of the repeated note we've added on top. So now, to complete the bar, we can add the missing 4th and 6th at the end. These last 2 notes are optional though, and throughout each example and written out pattern, these added filler notes will vary depending on the different inversions for the exercise, as some do work better than others for fingerings, or sometimes there are just more than one nice option for the sound of the phrase. But adding the 4th and 6th work great for this exercise, and I'm actually playing the 6th first and then finishing the pattern on the 4th. This helps lead us into the next harmonized chord in the key of D major, which is E minor, as that 4th now becomes the 3rd of this next chord. This just helps to imply the chord change. Okay, so in the same way we can take any of these chord voicings and move them through their harmonized scale, we also want to do the same for practicing these patterns. So here's D major 7 in drop 2 taken through the scale. And here it is in drop 3. Now, with the pattern applied to these reference chords in the same way of taking each note through the scale, we get this. What's cool about doing this is that as we take the pattern through the harmonized scale, we're discovering shapes that correspond to other chord qualities like minor 7, dominant and half diminished chords. And also, if we apply this pattern to other parent scales and their modes, which we'll do, we'll get a minor major 7 and a major 7 sharp 5 shape as well. The 2nd, 4th and 6th intervals, which we're using as filler notes, will of course vary depending on what mode you're playing in, but the drop voicing shapes for these 7th chords will be consistent. far we've been playing these drop voicings and patterns with the bottom note voiced from the low E string. However, we can also build these drop voicings from the A string. And so it's nice to practice this pattern to help with that visualization as well. Staying in the same D major key and starting in a similar low range of the guitar, we're actually going to begin with the pattern applied to the fourth chord of the key. This is because when we take a voicing or pattern through the diatonic scale, we should be able to start from any point. So in this case, we're starting from the low range of the fretboard regardless of where the one chord is for the key. This is especially important to do when dealing with modal harmony, where any of the diatonic patterns from the corresponding parent scale will work for the chosen mode. We'll get into this more when we talk about applying these ideas to chord changes later in the video. Here's the D major scale harmonized as drop 2 voicings in second inversion, but built from the A string. And here's the same thing, but for the drop 3s. Now, when applying the pattern to this, we'll need to play the closed voiced arpeggio down an octave to make sure it stays in range. Throughout all the different patterns which I've written out, there are always going to be little variations like this, depending on what works best and how we're applying the pattern. In this case though, the filler notes can stay the same as they still work great. Okay, so where this gets really exciting is that we can now expand on this by going back and applying the same concept to the other inversions of these drop chords. For example, let's take a quick look at the drop chords voiced in root position instead. Here's drop 3s in root position in the key of D major, starting on the 4 chord. And here are the drop 2s. Let's take this to the A string version. You could actually keep the closed voiced arpeggio up the octave here as well if you wanted. That's one of the variations. And then again, taking this through the scale, let's start on the 6th chord just so that we start the low range of the fretboard again. So. We can of course apply the same concept to the first inversion and the third inversion as well. I won't demo all of those as it will take quite a while, but I have written them out for both the E string and A string versions, with several filler note variations for each pattern, as those inversions in particular do require a few variations to make them flow. These are all written out for both the major scale modes and also for the melodic minor. So that leads me to the next thing I wanted to mention, which is applying this to other parent scales. As mentioned earlier, it's really important to practice these ideas for other parent scales. As well as the major scale, we should put equal focus on learning the melodic minor. That way we'll discover new chord qualities and also be able to apply this idea when playing melodic minor modes. Here's the pattern in second inversion for D melodic minor. Or in root position. Taken through the scale. Finally, to give you some musical ideas for applied practice, we want to develop the ability to voice lead these harmonic patterns through chord changes. Just like I've mentioned in other videos, the goal for improvising patterns is to have control to start from any degree of the scale while implying a certain mode. This will allow us to voice lead when changing to a non-diatonic chord, regardless of where we are in the scale. I've put together a few ideas for both modal harmony and also for more functioning harmony based on dominant to tonic resolutions. For the progressions, each applied pattern is individually named based on the mode we are visualizing the pattern as, which will share the same notes and parent scale as the chord we're playing over. I do find this can help when first developing the ability to voice lead, and you'll also be able to clearly see how the root movement connects for each pattern as the chord changes. With some experimenting, you'll also find which patterns applied to the diatonic chords from the scale work best to bring out the certain mode or actual chord we're playing over. Here are some examples. So thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the ideas and the concept. Hopefully this gives you some musical things to practice that will help develop your fretboard visualization and also your harmonic awareness. If you have any questions, pop them down in the comments, and if you enjoyed the video, I'd really appreciate it if you gave it a like, and feel free to subscribe to see more. If you'd like to get all the PDF material as well as a load of other concepts to explore, you can find that all on my Patreon page. I've put a link in the description below. Huge thanks again, and I'll see you soon.